Dan and Amy, let's hop right to it. Continuing our conversation following on our discussion with Joe DiGenova, former U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. We're now pleased to have former Assistant Director of the FBI and now the President of the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund, Ron Hosko, join us. Ron, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Sure, happy to be with you.
So our conversation with Joe DiGenova, he said Comey's hand was forced by the rank and file, that there was a full-on mutiny at FBI that prompted the announcement on Friday, the letter to members of Congress, and then ultimately this becoming public. Is that your take on it? Do you have any insight of your former agency?
I do, and that is not the information that I've heard. I did hear that the FBI senior leadership, being a relatively small group, had a open discussion about their options, whether they should go forward in this way, and some minds were changed during that discussion. They did hear some input from DOJ, but ultimately the director, I think, looks at himself and tries to find what's the right thing to do at this moment, and this is the path that they chose.
Well, there's 650,000 emails that were found. I mean, where do you go from here? How do you start?
Wow. Well, so first, the initial reporting was emails, and then it was, a lot of emails, then thousands, and then tens of thousands. And so if it is 650,000, I think the immediate piece of it, because of the election, is to try to compare this cache of emails against what they've already seen and evaluated and shared with the intelligence community to see what's classified or not, and come to some, understanding about what is in there that's new to us. What have we not seen, and what of it is classified? Is there a crime there in the way that that's been transmitted, shared, stored? And then, what part of that goes to Hillary Clinton versus purely Huma Abedin?
Right. So dedupe the emails and then kind of rank order priority the classified. That makes sense. And it's worth noting, too, as far as we understand it, she's not one of the names that has been listed in the press as having an immunity deal with justice, right? So she's in a different position than, say, some like Cheryl Mills, Hillary Clinton's former chief of staff, that at least had partial immunity.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I think there is some bad information that's out there that ought to be corrected. And I do, and I share the frustration of some of my former colleagues and retired folks who don't think the FBI is doing the best possible job in getting the truth out. The struggle here is when you have a criminal investigation, you tend not to talk about it at all. Mm-hmm. Because it's what the FBI does. You zip it up, you let an indictment speak or an arrest speak or a conviction speak, and then maybe there's a press conference afterwards. But here there's a lot of, I think, bad information out there, and I'll give you a couple of examples if you want.
Yeah, sure.
Please.
So there is a perception, I think, that the FBI handed out these blanket immunity deals like candy. Mm-hmm. And my understanding is that the two IT guys that got immunity deals were to get what they thought were low-level peripheral players in early on so they could, really get up to speed on what happened in this case on the technical side. And my understanding and belief is that neither of these were seen as complicit, as potential subjects, as intentional co-conspirators or anything of that sort. So they gave, the Bureau's view, I think, is that they traded away nothing to give those two deals. The other two, with regard to Mills and Samuelson, these are the folks that purportedly reviewed all of the emails that were still in their possession on a couple of devices and handed those devices over to the FBI. And those immunity deals were not any sort of blanket immunity. They were for purely the act of producing those suspect laptops. And so the FBI could turn around and say, hey, you just handed us classified laptops, we're going to charge you for the possession. And so that's a very, very narrow immunity deal. And again, so I don't think the public understands that or recognizes that if other criminality is shown, then the FBI will go in that direction, and they will not be buffered by these deals.
All right, fair point. Let me ask you something though about the Comey decision on Friday. If it wasn't the response to a mutiny, then what was the calculus to make this decision, do you suspect? What would you have advised as a former assistant director?
Well, first, he was put in this, unusual, extraordinary position by the bad judgment of the Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, in her getting on a plane or letting Clinton on her plane and having this, fairly lengthy meeting with Bill Clinton. And so, she had to, because everyone was saying politics will be involved, she shot herself in the foot, and Jim Comey dove on a grenade that had her name on it. I do believe the FBI was going to come to the same conclusion, but now Comey decided to step into the breach and make the statement that he did, which was extraordinary back in May. And then it was Comey who told Congress, I will be, as fully transparent as I can under the law. And he went over and testified for 4 hours. And he committed to them to let them know about developments in this case because it had been, open and notorious, momentous. And I think this was just another step on that same treacherous path that Comey has been on since he stepped up in July because he felt he had to. And now I believe here, Comey felt he had an obligation to tell this Congress something material may have just changed, and I'm not in a position to sit on it for 2 weeks and let the election go by, because what if it is the smoking gun? What if it is those pieces that would lead to an indictment of the president-elect at that point or her inner circle? And are you have guilty knowledge? You're pregnant with it, and at what point do you have to share? And I think Comey, at the end of the day, felt like he had made these representations to the overseers. He takes that government oversight seriously and felt compelled to do it.
All right. He is Ron Hosko, former assistant director of the FBI, now the president of the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund. Ron, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate your insights.
My pleasure.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.